Good afternoon, New Minds Nation. Here we are at the end of the day. Of course, I'm Ben Cook, co-founder and CEO of New Minds, creators of New Minds TV. And I promised you that I was going to have some exciting friends join me for these conversations at the end of the day. So you just did not just have to listen to me shell out golden nuggets for you day after day. And today you are in for a supreme treat on a Friday. It's like that Friday afternoon just before the weekend kicks off, like super treat. I think you're going to agree that this conversation is going to be a super gem in itself. My guest today is Dr. Jessica Koehler. She has a PhD in school psychology from, I'm just checking my notes here to make sure I get it right, the University of Maryland. And in your graduate research, you focused on school-based prevention, school team collaboration, and teacher efficacy. It's what I love about your background is you have such a cool mix between research and what we might call the practical, actually working with schools directly. You did some stuff at the neuroimaging lab at Georgetown University. And to top it off, you're a homeschool mom right now yourself, which of course is very relevant and topical in these times. So I guess what I'm leaving out here is that you're also a writer for Psychology Today, and that's actually how I first came across you. I think one of your articles was posted on LinkedIn, and it caught my attention, and I read it, and I thought, wow, I like this framework. I like the angle of this thinking, and we got connected that way. And then as this show evolved, I knew that I wanted to bring in some fresh thoughts and some fresh insights from people with unique experiences that could add to the conversation right now and be super poignant and relevant. So Dr. Jessica, thank you for joining us on New Minds TV and the day.
Thank you so much for having me and for that amazing introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited to be here, and what you're doing is fascinating to me, and really kind of connects with so many things that I'm very, very interested in. And I'm happy that you came upon one of my articles on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And so what we decided to do, there's so many great things that you've written. As we were kind of preparing for this talk today, we kind of looked at where could we start, right? What's one of the jumping off points we could use from one of your pieces of writing? And we decided on this fantastic article from Psychology Today. Got it right here in front of me. It's called Divergent Perception: How Seeing is Perceiving and Believing. Now, when I see a title and subtitle like that, I'm already like in. This is like, okay, let's dump into the matrix and let's get down into that rabbit hole and look around and dig around. That's my kind of thing. And the article doesn't disappoint. It's very fascinating. And I mean, I'm joking a little bit about the rabbit hole. There are some rabbit hole elements to it, but also it ends up being extremely practical. And I think we can create a bridge for parents and anyone else kind of navigating this strange new world right now from the premise of that article and things they can do right now that could be really beneficial down the line in terms of their creativity, the ability to embrace uncertainty. So I want to stop blabbing for a minute here. And
I love that you read it. You connected with the article so much. It makes me so happy that it's one of my favorite things that I've written. And I kind of, if you probably noticed, I have sort of what I like to call a psychological polymath. Like I like things for a wide variety. I like to dive deeply into a wide variety of areas within psychology, but this is probably my favorite kind of thing to be thinking about at this point. This idea that, perception, as psychologists and scientists have been studying it forever. We think about how does information come in through our sensory modalities, right? How do we see a flower? How do we, smell something? And that information comes in and it sort of is processed and we interpret it a lot, right? Based on our prior experiences by a process called transduction, right? And we think about that at that micro level. But if we sort of translate that to more of a macro level, how do we perceive the world in our everyday lives, right? How does perception happen, and how much of it is actually filtered and based on our prior experiences? And it turns out, according to a lot of neuroscientists, and my favorite at this point is Dr. Bo Lotto, who runs the Lab of Misfits, fascinating guy who's doing some absolutely unbelievably cool research.
Is it literally called the Lab of Misfits?
It is literally called the Lab of Misfits. And it's so cool. It's not like the typical, I've never worked in a lab like what he's doing. It's like not like the typical scientist. He's like working with like Cirque du Soleil, and he has a TED Talk where he has Cirque du Soleil on. It's just unbelievable stuff, right?
Oh my goodness. You gotta send me the link to that TED Talk, please.
I will. Looking at the neuroscience of perception. And I read his book Deviate, and I was completely hooked on it. It was kind of really aligned with that I was thinking about in my own personal life, right? Why is it that, going back to that whole idea of perception at a macro level, then at a micro level, the same thing happens. Everything we are perceiving in the world is biased and based on our previous experiences, right? We are making decisions and seeing the world in a certain way, totally based on everything that's happened to us in our past, and everything that we see happening around us. And that can be really problematic, right? We just, that sort of conforming to the herd can be really problematic, especially if it's making us unhappy, especially if we're making choices to we don't even realize that our perception is sort of constricted and we're not able to like look outside of it. Like that can be really problematic for our mental health, for our children's mental health. And Dr. Lotto talks a lot about what we can do. And he says the thing that we need to do is to become comfortable with sort of stepping into that uncertainty. Instead of trying to do anything to avoid that uncertainty, what's going to move us forward is the ability to step into that uncertainty, those uncertain kind of things, to be able to like kind of see beyond our experiences, right? And he says a lot of that, and I agree with him, is about, being able to just question our assumptions. Like if we're totally, and I will use some examples from our own life, like as parents, if we're having our kids or we are having a really bad time, like something's really a big struggle and like everybody else is doing it, so we just feel like we should be doing it, whether it's like your kids on the soccer team, they've always played soccer, you always played soccer, but it's not really working out, right? And we just get so pushed by this conformity, or just activities in general that so many people are in, right now it's different during quarantine, lockdown, but so many families are so overly busy. Everyone's in so many activities. Schoolwork is crazy, right? Like for our family, we kind of have taken this idea and kind of stepped into uncertainty. We're like, we're going to stop doing some of the things just that other people are doing because they do them, right? Yeah. We're going to, that's how we started homeschooling, right? Because we like to travel. We want to be able to do that more. That's really important for our family. And that was one of the big, in individualizing the education for our kids as well. But also other things, like when we found ourselves like overly scheduled, it was causing a lot of family angst, right? So, we had to say, okay, even though everyone else in our family, all of our friends, they're on this path where every night they have so many activities and this kind of thing, we're willing to sort of step off that path, sort of to kind of go beyond what we know personally and think about things in a different way. So I'm just kind of rambling on about it now, but the idea is, so the idea is that like from a perceptual, we can translate that basic perceptual processing that we have, like how we visually see or how we smell things, to like our everyday life, like how we're how we're actually seeing what's going on around us is so constrained by our own experiences. Like I talk to so many parents who it's really a struggle to think about. And these are parents who are maybe really struggling because their kids are a little bit different, a little bit atypical, but they always have gone to public school. The kids have always gone to public school. The parents did, and they can't think about another sort of path. And I try to help them think like there are alternative paths, and it's okay. There is no one path. And sometimes when they're willing to sort of step into that uncertainty and sort of question why it is that they've always believed there's only one way to do school, or there's only one way to discipline your kids the way you were, maybe, then they start, it's almost like they become like unchained, like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. We can actually make our life, fit better for what the needs are of our own children and ourselves. And it's just fascinating to watch unfold. And I've been lucky enough to see that unfold within our own family. We have two very sort of divergent boys, and within other families as well.
Yeah, I love that. So, okay, man, you took us like on an evolutionary journey there from like the science of perception into like the moment. I love that. So I want to back up a little and kind of jump around on that timeline. No, I love it. So to go back to the article a little bit. So we have this physiological machinery, right, that helps us perceive the world around us, what we commonly know as our senses. And a lot of us just assume that we're all taking in the same information. Like, oh, look, there's a rock. Ben sees a rock. Jessica sees a rock. They're seeing the same rock. But it's not so simple. Basically, what you're saying is there's a lot of complexity in the processing of that information that gets interpreted between the actual raw material world, right? We won't go too far down the hole and even debate whether there is a material world, but between that perceived material and how we're perceiving it here, there's a kind of a story that goes in that's based on our experiences. So we can't make assumptions. A lot of us tend to, there's this phrase common sense, right? And I always like to argue that there's really no such thing as common sense. There's kind of like a consensus sense that, a large mass of people or a culture kind of agrees is a truth with a little t. And there's a story about when the Western world was first kind of expanding and exploring, that the first ships from Portugal, for example, as they approached the coast of modern day Central America, the indigenous peoples, they say they were standing there on the shore and they looked out onto the horizon, and as the ships approached, there was this was such a brand new object in their experience that they couldn't even see or perceive it. There was no way for them to completely process it. And whether or not that story is apocryphal or not in concept, I love that, because it's like, I always ask myself, like, on my, hypothetical horizon here, are there things that I'm not even seeing because they're not in my realm of experience yet, because I'm so constricted? And as I took some notes as I was reading your article again today, and I keep coming up with this like ping pong match between these two competing forces. So on the one hand, you've got, certainty, safety, conformity, and in your article you say how, like, from an evolutionary point of view, we're kind of wired for these things. That's one reason why we do this filtering, is because we want security. And that's where the safety of the herd comes in.
Right.
And whenever we get too far from that herd, it's almost like these alarm bells start going off. So I call that like the constricting force, right? But at the same time, we have this pull or this call to like creativity and innovation and even what I call expansion. But that really requires stepping away and through those alarm bells a little bit, right? You think that's a fair summary of what you're saying?
Oh, I think that's an excellent summary. And it's like these competing forces. And I hope I don't come across in the article as saying that conformity is always bad, right? There's a reason why, like you said, from an evolutionary perspective, that, if we were in our group and at night we just decided to like walk out of our group and, got killed by a lion, our genes didn't get passed on, right? That's the reason for that. But, to move us forward, and to move us forward, to innovate, to think creatively, to go beyond what we already know, to think in different ways, we need to be willing to step into that uncertainty. Because, if we let our perceptions stay constricted, we're not going to, sort of move ourselves forward and innovate as much as we can. And I think I like to think about this all the time as a parent, and, for my kids as well, what can we do to help them sort of take off those blinders, so to speak, and kind of see a bigger portion of the world? And as a parent, it can be kind of challenging, right? Because we do, we want some conformity at home, right? So we want them to fall in line, and we want them to. But, we try to really hard balance that, I want you to question your assumptions, question why you're doing things. And I mean, that's really important. And it's really connected to that creative thinking, that divergent thinking that is so very important, that is going to help come up with novel ideas. And I think going back to some of the points you made that were so fascinating, I was trying to keep up, in terms of, we take for granted that other people are seeing what we're seeing, right? Yeah. Like you were saying, like we just think, and and we don't realize how much our biases come into play with everything, right? Like who we meet, we think, oh, wow, you think, you meet someone for the first time, but depending on what they look like or what their title is or any of those things, there's so much of your prior experiences that come into like how you end up interpreting your interaction with that person. And I think if we can just constantly keep that in mind and try to kind of step outside of those biases a bit, it can open up a whole new world. A really fascinating example, like a specific example of like the issues with perception came up. I don't know if you remember, if you are on a bunch of social media a couple years ago, that whole Facebook issue where remember the dress?
Oh yeah.
And some people were
the blue dress.
Right. And you had people in your family that were like seeing completely different dresses,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I think that was sort of a window into like the basic levels of perception that we aren't viewing things exactly the same all the time.
Yeah.
And if we can extrapolate that to like the larger scale of the world, if we can all understand that we're not seeing things exactly like everyone else, right?
Yeah.
It can have some profound consequences. And I just love that idea and thinking about that, and, so, how we can go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So, you were kind of extrapolating to the global picture, and I was just thinking back. I don't want to get into politics, but just thinking back to like the divisive nature of the last several years and how that dichotomy of perception and being unable to empathize with the fact that maybe people are just putting it through a different filter. They're looking at the same, reality, but it's coming through a different filter for them. And for them, that is truth. And so from your experience, how do we break that impasse? I mean, you don't have to talk about the political level necessarily.
The politics. Yeah, no, I'm fascinated by that exact issue. So I'm from a very small rural town in Pennsylvania where there's a lot of different experiences and belief systems than where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area now, right? Yeah. So it's very different. And I have family and friends in different areas. And it's all, and I would say I initially didn't handle some of the challenges of figuring out how to in a kind way, deal with some of the political things, but I've grown a lot in the past several years, I feel. And I've actually done quite a bit of reading about that. And what can we do? Like, how can you alter beliefs at all when you're so far apart? And, do you want to try to alter beliefs? And I think what I've really come to conclude after some reading is, like, what can we do to sort of figure out some commonality initially, right? Like if you can figure out, because there's always commonality, even with people that are coming from a very different background than yourself and very different beliefs politically, there's always something where there's some common ground. And if you initially connect where that common ground is, it can be amazing what can happen from that conversation, right? Like even if you totally are in disagreement with so many of their political views, they might be a parent. They might be, they might like soccer. I'm a soccer fan. You know what I mean? Like there might be some way you can connect at that basic level first, and then the connection that can occur from there, and then they'll start hearing you, right?
Yeah.
Because if you just start off at the beginning, they won't hear you. Like, oh my gosh, why do you believe that? What's wrong with you? That kind of thing. You're never going to make any headway. But
yeah, great. I love that. And so connecting that back to sort of like this dichotomy between certainty and uncertainty, and then safety versus creativity, conformity, innovation, right? And so I want to take it straight to the present moment, to quarantine, to COVID. What I'm kind of worried about is it's almost like collectively we've been put into fight or flight mode. Like right now it's all about triggering that safety impulse, triggering that herd mentality. Stay safe. It's all about safety, protect your family. And that's the opposite, of course, of this more expansive energy we're talking about, which is the innovation and being able to push through those alarm bells of conformity. So what's your take, just as a psychologist looking around at the world right now? What's your take on that? Because I do see examples of that, but at the same time, I'm sure you've seen as well on social media and around examples of the opposite, of connectivity, of people being very altruistic. What's your take on that right now?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is really true. Like right now is such a scary time for so many people. And I even found myself early on getting pulled into watching too much news and, just focusing on just like, oh my gosh, what if this happened? What if this happened? So I've really tried to change gears and talk to like family and friends about, really focusing on what we can control individually, of course, while still caring and having a lot of empathy for what's going on for everyone else. We can't become overwhelmed by things we can't control, right? That'll lead into like spirals of anxiety, which can lead to depression. So we really have to focus on what we can control and understand there's a reason to have some of the fear that we're having, but realize, depending on what your particular situation is, that it's probably minimal, right? And if you have other, how can you, focusing on the things like how can you support other family members, friends and stuff like that. I would just say totally focusing on the things you can control. Now, going to your piece about, like that connectedness, I've totally been seeing that. I'm on Twitter way too much. And I'm seeing so many people doing all kinds of things, really trying to have more of a connection with people that they fear are alone, and like sort of sparks of creativity happening, people coming up with new ideas, right? Like my son's turning 10 on Monday, and he was for some reason super excited to go to Toronto for his birthday. I don't know. He wanted to go there. And we had a trip planned, but we had to cancel it. Yeah. So we're coming up, we're going to camp out in the backyard. My husband bought all this like amazing camping stuff that and we're so lucky we can do that. Yeah. But, and then we're going to have, it's a secret, a Zoom birthday party where we're having so many family come in to just like sing happy birthday for him for his 10th birthday. And like my mom just set up like a, Zoom bingo, right? It was like with a whole bunch of family members. It was great fun. So like all these new ideas are coming up. Even for me, like, I'm finding therapeutic, like going through we love to travel, but we can't right now. So I'm going through like all kinds of old photographs and like, sort of, posting them with quotes and stuff, right? It's sort of, just coming up with new things. So I do think while this is a time where a lot of us are kind of constricting a bit and being fearful, there is an opportunity for us to sort of step outside of that and sort of harness that creativity that might be like underlying right now to cope with what's going on. So.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling those two streams, and that's kind of why that was the kind of a setup of my question. It's like you would think that we would be all in constriction mode, anxiety, fight or flight, but at the same time we are seeing this surge of creativity, and I've experienced the same thing at a personal level. Sudden bursts of creativity, new spaces kind of opening up that weren't there before in terms of like headspace for creation, for new possibilities and problem solving. So I think it's this, I don't want to argue necessarily that it's an instinct, but it's almost like there's this balance that we have as a collective, that when we get pushed too far one way or the other, it's almost like this quarantine is almost like activated that other side of us that wants to expand. I don't know.
Pulling us back, right? Yeah, it's pulling us back to like, yes. I feel the same way. Like, I feel like all of a sudden, like I'm having these ideas that I want to share. And I mean, I feel like it is being spurred on a bit by quarantine. And I am seeing it like on social media, people doing some really interesting things. So that's the positive. And just people, I feel like I'm seeing sort of a more empathy, people being a little bit kinder. Maybe it's my own constricted perception focusing on those things, but just people realizing that we're kind of in this together, right? Yeah. And that we should feel more of a connection. While this is terrible that this is going on, maybe that's one really positive thing, a positive outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've already given some good specific ideas for like these new homeschooling parents. Lots of words have come up for it, like involuntary homeschooling, and quarantine has come up recently. We've been using that. So you are an example of someone who voluntarily jumped into the homeschool world, but what advice can you give to these families who are, in this juggling episode and trying to get it all done and do it right and feel good? What are a few pieces of advice you might have for these families just trying to make this work right now?
Yeah, so we've been homeschooling for 5 years. And the first thing I will say is there's no way to do it right. There's going to be, I like to think about homeschooling, parenting, all these things as sort of a goodness of fit model that we think about in psychology, right? It's going to be an interaction between your kids and who you are and what kind of job you have and what your particular situation is. There's no like perfect model at all. I will say, and we have what's been fascinating for us is we have probably two of the most, our kids are so very, very different. So what their homeschooling looks like is very, very different for each of them. Yeah. But for both of them, a big focus that we have is that we really want to let them dive deeply into what they are interested in. And I know a lot of people are having schoolwork sent home and that kind of thing, and they've got to really get stuff done. But I will say for kids' motivation, for all of our motivation as adults as well, if we're allowed to have quite a bit of choice and self-direction to some extent, whether it's, you have this amount of work to do, but you can decide if you want to do it in the morning or at night or when you want to do it or what you want to, in what order you want to do it. giving your kids as much sort of autonomy as possible can really spark the motivation. I know for our boys, it's just fascinating. And I'm like, yep, it's your, you pick what you really want to be studying. And this semester, we let, especially with our older son, he picks out the classes and what he wants to be working on. And he dives so deeply into what he is interested in that. And then like so much learning revolves around that, even if he's interested in a lot of academic subjects, but even if he's studying, something like in science, it's fascinating how it connects to history and then to math. And, once you dive deeply and you let your kids dive deeply and, to whatever it is they're interested in. And for some kids, it might be, my younger son right now is really into like Mario Kart, right? we're trying to translate that into how we can talk about those kind of things. He's into a couple different things. How you can use what they're really interested in and tie it into whatever they are supposed to be learning, I think is really key. And, we that whole idea of, I had mentioned earlier prior to this, that quote, Joseph Campbell says that it's something like, follow your bliss and doors will open where there once were walls. And I think that is one of the guiding ideas that we have as homeschooling parents, kind of letting the kids kind of direct a bit, and you will just be surprised by what opens up for them. And not only just for the kids, for yourself too, right? If you let yourself sort of dive, and this goes back to the big conversation we're having, if you let yourself sort of divert off the typical path, you will be probably astounded by what sort of opportunities open up if you like dive deeply into what you're really interested in.
Yeah, I love that.
Talk to so many people in life that's happened to.
Yeah, so. and it can be scary as the homeschooling parent to just kind of take those reins off and trust that process of them pursuing that intense interest, and just knowing, like you were describing, how it organically is going to connect, across subjects, cross curricular. But it takes some guts, because that's the opposite of conformity, is kind of just trusting, letting loose. And that's the New Minds philosophy as well. We call it passion-based learning, real inspired learning, where it's, you just trust that creative instinct, that curiosity instinct, I should say, and that it's going to lead to like a healthy, rich place. So another thing I want to throw at you. So I'm really big at, reading about like habit development and, goal setting and habit development. And yesterday I came across again this concept called the Goldilocks rule, or the Goldilocks zone, and it has to do with motivation. And it's a principle that says, we're most motivated on a task, excited about a task, when it's just outside of our current skill level. Like it's not so hard that we're like a guaranteed failure, and it's not easy. Over the long term, it leads to boredom. And if you put this on a graph, it's actually pretty cool. There's a little sweet spot zone where things are just kind of beyond our current ability level. So
totally.
How have you seen that kind of in the homeschool environment, where if it is kind of like self-guided, do they find that place themselves on their own?
Well, going to what you're saying, the Goldilocks zone, that's really based on the idea of Lev Vygotsky. I don't know if you've heard of Lev Vygotsky. He was a Russian, I think he was, he was like kind of a contemporary Piaget, but he died, or John Piaget, but he died early of tuberculosis, I believe.
Yeah.
And he kind of came up with this idea of the zone of proximal development,
right,
which is like that idea, right?
Yeah.
There's there's what kids can learn by themselves. There's what they aren't ready to learn. And then there's that sweet spot of what they're able to learn with a little bit of assistance, with a little bit of guidance.
Yeah.
And that is so very important. I mean, like that idea is so profound, and like, it's constant within homeschooling for us. I will say that is it's a continuous recalibration, right? Nice. Sometimes it's going to change. And I think going back to what tips can I give in terms of homeschooling, number one, be flexible, right? Some things that you thought were going to work aren't going to work, right? And you have to be okay with going down a different path. And I think that's, I've had a couple of family members that the first day they found out they were going to be homeschooling, they started making all these schedules, exactly, color coded, that kind of thing. It was amazing. Yeah. And I think I was like that originally when we started homeschooling, right? But, I've learned that I have to, especially with our younger son, who's a little challenging sometimes, I have to be much more flexible. And for him, it's constantly figuring out, okay, we're working on something, and it's a little bit beyond even what he can work on with assistance. And so we have to recalibrate a bit, or what's called scaffolding is another term that Vygotsky used a lot. That, scaffolding, think about the scaffolding, the supports on a building. As a parent, you're going to scaffold their learning. And I know I see again on Facebook, lots of my friends, they're really struggling. Their kids are struggling with the math, and they don't want to give them the answer, but the kids aren't able to solve the problems independently. So it's figuring out where in that zone between what the kids know and what the kids don't know, what can you do to provide that scaffolding? What can you do to provide that support? Right.
Yeah.
And it might be something as simple as using graph paper. It might be, like you have to break down like all the steps you think about in your head. And most of the time they're not that complex. What is it that I can do to provide a little bit of additional support to reduce their frustration and make it so it's a task they can complete? So that's kind of how I would frame that. And I think the Goldilocks, I love that term. That's such an awesome term to think about, Vygotsky's work.
Yeah, I bet you didn't think this convo was going to take a turn back to Vygotsky.
No, it's interesting. I love
it. Yeah. I think that's really, really helpful way to explain that when you use the term scaffolding, because that's the way parents can look at it. Like there's a way to help your struggling child without taking them all the way there and giving them the answer. You just build more scaffolding. Like if that ZPD, right, if that zone of proximal development is too wide right now, but this is the assignment that they have to do for whatever reason, then build that scaffolding so that it is kind of like their Goldilocks zone, And like you said, I think
we focus too much. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I think sometimes we worry so much about the outcome, right? As parents, as teachers, whatever. I teach online classes too, and really, what it's all about is the learning, right? So, what can we do to make the learning happen? Be less worried about the outcome. Be more worried about those sparks happening and the learning happening with your kids at home right now. Especially, we didn't even talk about the fact that, like, the anxiety, all these other things going on that are also influencing this sort of crisis schooling that's going on. So it's definitely a challenging time. And I empathize with so many. We already were homeschooling, so I feel like it's a bit easier for us. Yeah. Now my husband's home all the time, but I know it's been really challenging for a lot of my family members.
Yeah. So if you were like, if there was a wand waved and you were suddenly the national minister of psychology for the country, and you could implement something that would help everybody based on what you know about psychology and in the situation, what would that be? Kind of putting you on the spot here a little bit.
So right now, to help in this particular moment,
yeah,
is that what you're? Okay,
yeah.
Okay. So I'm picturing myself heading Hogwarts somehow.
Okay, I know, right? The whole wand thing took you there.
I want to be like McGonagall, but in charge.
Okay.
But I would go back to like that whole idea of really that giving choice to your kids, mm-hmm. and that there's a whole, and you can base it on science. I'm not just making this up.
Yeah.
Edward Deci is a famous psychologist who developed self-determination theory. And he really has shown us over the past several decades that to induce motivation, the thing to get kids to be intrinsically motivated, right? Which is what the real goal is, to want to do things out of pure joy, not because they're going to get 10 M&Ms or 5 stickers, those kind of things, right? Because those kind of extrinsic reinforcers, we haven't really talked about that. They can get your kid to do stuff in the moment. They can actually be really detrimental for long-term motivation and creativity. So, right, we want to try to stay, sometimes you need to use those tools, but we want to try to stay away from those, especially for tasks that require creativity. So I would say that whole self-determination theory, giving kids a bit of autonomy, letting them self-direct, and, just making sure that whatever as part of that self-determination theory is also this idea of connectedness. So while this is a really stressful time for parents, and I know a lot of parents are really struggling when their kids are struggling with an academic problem or something like that, try to do whatever you can to remain connected and let your kids know even if you're super stressed and you're like, oh my gosh, how do you not know that answer? Trying your best as a parent to sort of, chill a little bit and like let them know that it's okay. And like I said, utilize those tools of scaffolding to try to meet them where they are in whatever particular thing they're struggling with. But I would say it's about choice. Giving your kids a little bit of autonomy will go a really long way in terms of parenting in general, in terms of homeschooling, in terms of having a happy home life with your kids. If you let them kind of be the captains of their own ship a bit, you kind of relinquish some control. It's kind of fascinating to see what unfolds from there.
Yeah. Okay. You're hired as headmistress of Hogwarts. That sounds good. You didn't know this was an interview for that. No, yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And I think that kind of brings us full circle because we started with the science of perception and took lots of beautiful twists and turns into a few rabbit holes and back up. And we kind of end on that very pragmatic note of like how you relate to your kids in this situation. And it's this balance. It's that same dichotomy we were talking about, the balance between the conformity and opening up to this possibility, to the creativity. And as a parent, using that as a framework too, like, both a healthy balance, I think is necessary, but just understanding that you can be comfortable with both. And relinquishing some of that
that's
control.
a great way to think about it. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Jessica, this has been like an extremely stimulating conversation. I can't imagine like ending Friday on a better note. So thank you for joining us. I hope you'll consider kind of coming back in the next couple of months as the situation evolves and giving us more insights, because that was just one of many articles that we could I feel like
I'd love to. And thank you so much. This has been an awesome conversation. I'm also here on quarantine, so it's awesome to have this stimulating conversation right now for me as well.
And if people want to reach you, read more about you, or even look at how you might help them out as a consultant, I've got your website right under you right now. It's KoehlerAcademy.com. And there they can find, do they have links to all your articles there as well?
You can link to all my articles. You can link to social media, email me, anything like that. I'm happy to connect.
Okay, fantastic. And you, just a reminder, you promised to send me a link to that TED Talk. One of our live streaming watchers, Doug, he's actually a New Minds team member. He posted a link to a TED Talk, but he's not sure if that's the one. So if you have a chance later to go into the comments on the Facebook video when it's there and just confirm if that's the one, and if it's not, add it if you don't mind.
Okay, it's a great TED Talk. I mean, it's fascinating. It's about awe, which is another how awe moves us forward. Wonder. It's another topic I'm very interested in. So.
Yeah, you're speaking New Minds language. Yeah. Okay, well, cool. Thank you again for taking the time. We so appreciate it. Fascinating conversation. Beneficial for everyone, I'm sure. And stay safe in sunny California.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.